cash flow is impacted. We don't have investments, we don't have multiple founders and things like that, or great cash flows which are coming in from other means of businesses than our mainstay of the work.
I have not paid the rent for last month, only part of it has been paid.
एक तो इंसिडेंट्स तो इस तरह से हुए कि हमें उसकी वजह से बाजार में से एक प्राइवेट जगह से मनी जो है वो क्रेडिट पे लेनी पड़ी.
And that was beginning to hurt because we suddenly were trying to figure out why aren't we able to pay our employees on time? Why are we struggling?
We can focus on different areas of expertise, and all this is possible if the money, which is the fuel for all this, besides the vision of course, the money is in place.
My experience is never fight with your customer. अगर हम उससे लड़ेंगे तो हमारी पेमेंट और डिले होएगी, ईगो इश्यूज आएंगे. Rather reach out to them, communicate with them, help them grow.
Based on prior experiences of the last 10 years, to ensure we really don't fall into a bigger pit, we've ensured and put up a payment follow-up process.
We send that, and then when we've not replied, then next one goes from us saying reminder 1. Then it says reminder 2, reminder 3. I don't think people like to see that very often, no?
So at this time, I went to my customer again and I told him my problem. I have put up a new manufacturing unit. A lot of my funds has gone into putting up this new innovative plant of technology.
तो कुछ इक्का दुक्का परसेंट 1-2% ऐसे लोग होते हैं जिनको बार बार रिमाइंडर्स देने पड़ते हैं. देखो, आप जब क्लाइंट चूज करते हो तो पहले ही देख के समझदार क्लाइंट को चूज करो.
Instead of customer coming to us and buying at their terms, we put a qualification clause for the customer because our capacity to manufacture is limited. Rule number 1, they should have money to pay us advance and willingness to pay us advance.
What we do at Pink Lemonade is we accept an advance for the work that we take on. Many of them have also started supporting us with different staggered payments for smaller milestones in the whole project.
So the day one when I started asking for advance, my first customer whom I asked, he said, अगर I still remember those words, अगर जूठा खाना है तो मैं मीठा खाऊंगा. If I want to give advance, I will give it to brand. Why should I give it to you?
We would expect that the client should pay us better, give us better margins. If you're not going to pay us for almost 2 to 3 months, it really doesn't work out.
We were sounded off about the MSME Act, which requires companies to pay MSME businesses within 45 days. So we have very gently introduced that with all our clients.
लेकिन गेम में हमको पता चला कि किसी भी बात को करो तो आप डॉक्यूमेंटेड कर लो, समझदार तरीके से, सही तरीके से अपनी टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस उसको बताओ, उसकी समझो.
कि हमें अपना प्रोडक्ट भी एक तो मार्केट से थोड़ा सा सस्ता बनाना पड़ेगा ताकि हमारी कैश फ्लो थोड़ी सी चलती रहे.
अगर उनकी क्रेडिट लाइन से बियॉन्ड उन्होंने परचेजिंग कर लिया, उनके पास पैसा नहीं है देने को, तो उनको हम समझा सकते हैं अपने एक्सपीरियंस से कि उनको कैसे परचेजेस को अपना रिकॉर्ड करना चाहिए.
बिल डिस्काउंटिंग इज द न्यू वे टू टैकल द डिलेड पेमेंट.
If you have a CRM software wherein you have to, everything is linked to each other, you need an invoice. An invoice will not be generated until and unless the accounting people will give us a go ahead to say that this payment has been received.
So I believe it is a question of starting somewhere and trying it. Unless you believe this is possible, I'm not the only one who is doing it. I know several SME who are doing such ways and are succeeding. So try it and fly.
So I recollect a story that we did on a women entrepreneur from Calcutta. Okay, she was 1962 Indo-China War. She was 7 or 8 year old. Her name is Monica Liu, and she's called the Dawn of Tangra. So Tangra is a place in Calcutta, and she is today. She runs 5 fine dining restaurants in Calcutta and doing very, very well as a businesswoman. So she started off as a refugee. She was arrested. She and her family, her parents, all of them were arrested and put into a camp in Rajasthan. And that's where she stayed for 5 years. And all these young, teenage and, slightly older young adults got together and wrote a letter to the Home Minister, and somehow they got freedom from there. Went back to Calcutta with the family, started off by, restarting life again, going back from a refugee camp. It's not easy. So started selling momos on the roads along with her mother. And that's where her entrepreneurial journey started. And thereafter, I've met her a couple of times. It was such an inspirational story that I went myself when I was the editor in my previous organization, Outlook Business, to meet her, because it was truly an inspirational story. And from selling momos, she ventured into multiple businesses. Unbelievable. She, traded in many things, umbrellas to school bags to various things. And then she said, because she was selling on the roads, she made connections with all these, people in the system, the local corporator, etc., and got into the infrastructure business. So did work for the government, like, the public works department, small little things. Then she did garments trading, apparel trading. Then she imported flat televisions and sold them, and did reasonably well for 3-4 years in each business, but then somehow or the other it didn't work out, and finally she found her calling in the restaurant business, and super happy and super successful. And at the end of the conversation, after listening to her journey, the usual question, right? You ask, like, what is the one advice you want to give other entrepreneurs, men and women? And she said the only advice, and what do you expect to that? Usually people say, never give up, stay the course, you should have the grit and determination to go over the hump, and you have to say this too shall pass, etc., right? So she said, I have nothing of that sort to say. The only thing I want to tell entrepreneurs, never get into a business which has a long working capital cycle, which doesn't give you cash upfront. And I thought that was like a sharpest, business insight from somebody who's tried so many businesses. And she said, restaurant business is great. Of course, restaurant business, we all know, have lots of other problems, but at least you get the money up front, and so it's a great business in that sense. And she said, if you are a small entrepreneur, you just cannot afford to be in a business which clogs up capital or cash for a long time. It's a death knell for a small entrepreneur. That is the advice she gave. The irony is that all small, medium businesses pretty much fall under that category. And in that problem, delayed payments is a significant part of that, why cash gets stuck in the business and your rewards tend to be, the returns in the businesses tend to be lower than what they ought to be. So, having said that, this is a system-wide problem. I think the report that Game and Dun & Bradstreet, supported by Omidyar, has articulated very eloquently. This is an endemic issue. It's a large-size issue, and we have to care about it because this is 1/3 of the total value addition in this value added in this country, and it's not. And if we were to envisage a better business environment for India, growth and progress, this cannot be ignored. But all of this is easier said than done, and I just want to make one point before I bring in Arun. Is that till last year, if you listen to what was the narrative in the stock markets or in the business environment, ESG was, a top-ranking topic. So everybody would say companies which focus on environment, climate change, social governance issues get better ratings in the stock markets. It's more rewarding and all that. And I think the last 1 year has completely squashed that whole theory. Who could have thought that the best performer, at least one of the best performers in the stock markets this year, would have been the fossil fuel companies, or Coal India for that matter, which is supposed to be a dying business. And so the long and short of this story, at least the learning for me, has been the markets are still very, very focused on economic rewards. And the market only rewards profit maximizing behavior. And whoever can exploit that to get that extra bit and maximize their profits, they are going to do it. The market is not going to offer us any solutions. And therefore, a lot of the solutions has to come from the ecosystem. We have to nudge players. Institutionally, we have to, tilt this equation in favor of a fair play. With that, I'll just stop and hand over to Arun to articulate the problem and the key findings from the study.
Thank you, Mahalakshmi ji. And good afternoon, everyone. As Mahalakshmi said, that post-lunch session is very difficult. In fact, that's true. But I'll try to keep everyone awake with showing lots of data. And data is new oil. I hope that will bring down some price. Let's see how much we want to add some context to this. Today, I think we gathered to discuss one talked about subject. Everyone knows it's not new. It's just the idea is to give a fresh perspective to find what we can be done to understand what solution we can bring on the table. It's not just on the paper, the reality. With that approach, earlier this year, DNB, GAME, and Omidyar Network came together to study what you call the delayed payment. Understand right from the what we call the people who are suffering, MSME. Understand, use our DNB data and talk to MSME on the ground and understand what they're basically facing. And we basically published the report, and a couple of months back launched. And I'm just going to touch base about that piece. More than that, at DNB, actually, we are talking to MSME for last 20 years. And across clusters, across state, across sectors, across segment, micro, small, medium, large, all set of companies we speak. And we basically ask very simple question. What are the constraints you guys face or challenges you guys face which create restrictions or constraint in graduating from micro to small, small to medium, and medium to large? There are library of responses we calculated. There are many concerns they raised. But two concerns was loud and clear, consistent across clusters, segment, state, and sectors. One was access to market, and second was access to finance. In fact, access to finance was largely cited by almost everyone, whether they belongs to micro, small, and medium. And this study basically just trying to give a additional flavor and context to that how it's pervasive, long-standing, and very common nowadays. In fact, the concept of delayed payment are more pervasive than it used to be. It's long-standing and it's normalized, irrespective of what definition we follow. As per Act, is basically any delayed payment beyond 45 days are considered delayed. Any payment beyond 45 days considered delayed. But when we talk to MSME, they consider delayed payment when buyer delay beyond the credit terms agreed between both parties. That could be 15 days, that could be 45 days, that could be 90 days. If they delay, they consider as a delayed payment. That's a big concern. It's a very common. Now, let me talk about a slightly positive story, what basically speak about the potential of a prompt payment or a potential which MSME carries, in terms of the importance of prompt payment. At DNB, we looked at something around 2,000 companies across micro, small, medium, and the large companies. What we found, micro and small companies, their net sales grew by 11% when the working capital cycle or days improved by 10%. When the working capital days improved by 20%, the net sales grew by 14%. That was story for small and medium. When the working capital days improved by 10%, medium companies' net sales improved by 13%, and 19% when the working capital days improved by 20%. Look at the potential it holds. Earlier Mahalakshmi ji was talking about that piece, the working capital days. Look at this. If you shrink the working capital cycle, look at the benefit micro, small they produce. Of course, the medium companies have a larger potential to grow, but given the size, micro and small can't be left out. We've got 94%, pretty much 95% of that are the micro and small. Now, on the contrary to that, the data suggests from our database, look at this. The 6% of GVA are basically logged in what we call the delayed payment. And unfortunate that 80% of that amount belongs to the micro and small companies. And more unfortunate that 65% of the total sales values for the micro companies are logged in the delayed payment. That data for small companies is 31%, and for medium companies is 25%. Just look at that micro company. The biggest suffer is all a power game in terms of the bargaining, because the 65% of their sales is logged into the delayed payment. Where's the growth? Where they're going to put the money back to the system? They're just waiting for their own fund to arrive to pay their own bills. That's the pain. That's what basically we have highlighted. Looking at slightly detailed one, slightly macro perspective, who all are basically, what are the sectors who are delaying? Wholesale trade, if you look at, they're good guys. In fact, the company operating out of that, they're paying well. In fact, just 12% of their delayed payment, 12% of their amount are considered delayed, which means they're paying to their vendor beyond agreed terms. Could be more than 60 days or could be more than 1 day. But look at other side, the extreme, the public administration. They're one of the biggest, in terms of the size they're operating in the country. The 25% of the payment are considered delayed, severely delayed, more than 60% beyond the credit terms. And another 36% are anywhere between 1 to 60 days delayed. Given the quantum of the size they are operating and then the penetration they have in the wider economy, the impact from the public administration is more felt across the MSME segment, because it's not just one company. Because they are delaying to their vendor, which is medium. In turn, medium company is delaying to the small. In turn, small is delaying to the micro. Look at the cycle. Everybody is adding 5 to 10 days extra. So if they're delaying 60 days to the medium, by the time it reaches to the micro, you add another 20 days. So that's basically the sectoral component. When I looked at state-wise, there are large state just doing good job in terms of the Maharashtra, if you see, not that bad. I think just 18% of the payment logged in terms of the delayed or considered delayed or severely delayed. But if you look at other side, Bihar and Odisha, the 40%, in fact, something around 75% of their payment logged in what you call the delayed payment. The company operating out of, or maybe the company operating from in the Bihar location or Odisha location, they're delaying to their vendor. Because its asymmetry impact is not about, there's a average, is basically there's a lot of variation one can see. Look at one state, we have a Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra, and other extreme, we have a Bihar and Odisha. There's a huge difference between both states. Now, we looked at another cuts from Mini Ratna, Maharatna, Navratna, and the Nifty 50. Look at this one. Maharatna, again in terms of the sheer size, the something around 75% or 65% of the amounts delayed, as against hardly 30% from the Nifty 50, which means there is a ample space for the consideration and the work. Now that was the data piece. How we can help, how at our level, at a research institution, at DNB level, how basically we help MSME to try to resolve those problems. We have what we call DNB Global Trade Programs, where we basically ask companies to share their trade receivables. With that, we got something 650,000 companies partner with us across 7 million trade receivables, what we call lines, trade lines. This number globally, we have 2 billion trade lines. What we do, we look at the data, we create a research focusing on how to improve your days sales outstanding and then receivable risk, and give those insights to company back. Because these insights are basically leading indicator for some of these companies going to default in terms of the payment, because bankruptcy is not overnight. There's a leading indicator for the bankruptcy goes back to 24 to 12 months. The company who's going to delay the payment to the vendor, they basically first delay on the very first tier 3 level type of vendor, what they call tea vendor or sweepers, that basically they do. Then they start delaying payment to the non-critical vendor. Then they start delaying payment to critical suppliers, raw material suppliers. They then start delaying payment or salary to their employees, and then they statutory default before they hit the bankruptcy. This information helps companies to better plan that if Mr. X is paying on time to Mr. Y, why the person is not paying to me? Let's have a conversation with that. Or the person operating out of particular sector, the sector itself is delaying. Let's basically have a diversification or some consultation. That's one thing. And the second, basically we collaborate, and this is exactly the same thing. We are collaborating with the stakeholders, trying to create the awareness that how all stakeholders can come together and create those public discussion forum to change those behavior across the delayed payment. And the third, we carry out multiple studies. Last 20 years we are talking, we have multiple cluster studies targeting that who's facing what, all those elements we talk about. With that, I'll just close and thank you. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Arun. So, Basant Kumar, CEO of C2FO, can you give a little brief about your company, what it does, and how do you approach this problem from your side?
Sure. Thanks very much.
This is really an August panel. We have one representative from, all the stakeholders out here, SMEs, the bank, the purchase managers, solution providers, all of them here. So it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Great. First of all, thank you, Arun, for setting the context so nicely for this discussion, and really honored to be part of this very esteemed panel. So C2FO is the world's largest marketplace for working capital. Our mission, quite simply, is to provide working capital to every business that needs it to grow, right? We were founded in 2008 on the heels of the great financial crisis, where tens of thousands of businesses, just as Arun articulated just now, tens of thousands of businesses globally were struggling to get access to working capital and access to liquidity. And banks, due to their opaque and long-winded credit underwriting processes, were quite unable to meet the demand that was being put on them. So what we at C2FO did was create a marketplace that matches the accounts receivable and the accounts payable for businesses, eliminating credit risk altogether, and providing a very seamless, frictionless process through which these businesses can get access to working capital when they need it, and something we're very proud of, at the price at which they need it, right? So over the course of the last 2 decades, or about 14 years since we've been in operation, businesses have used C2FO to get access to over $200 billion in liquidity globally. And we think we're going to hit the $1 trillion mark in the next 3 to 4 years, such as the pace at which we are growing. And today we cover over 1.5 million businesses globally through this network that we have created. I think closer home, and that's the issue that we're really here to talk about in the Indian context. We've been in India for the last 5 to 6 years. And in India, we service or are connected to about 2 lakh businesses and have facilitated liquidity to the tune of about 80,000 odd crores in the course of our time here. Of those businesses, a great majority of them are MSMEs. And we understand that while we have had, this early success, so to speak, with this program, we know we are just scratching the surface, right? The problem is much, much bigger than what we have currently solved for. If you look at the numbers, I think Arun touched on that as well, but, the delayed payments problem itself is anywhere to the tune of, 5 lakh crore or 10 lakh crore. The broader credit problem is probably, 5% of India's GDP or 6%, there's varying estimates there. So, it's going to take more than a C2FO, first of all, to solve the problem, but really great that we're having this conversation. And, as we think about how we solve this at nation scale, which is what we like to talk about at C2FO, there's a couple of themes that we really, focus on, right? One is awareness. I think in all of the sessions that I've been a part of today or I've heard today, awareness has been the key theme, right? And, there's awareness around, first of all, the problem, which is what we're talking about, but also about the myriad solutions that are out there, right? So the government has come out with a bunch of schemes over the course of years, during COVID, there's been a lot of support given in terms of credit guarantees. Previously there have been Mudra schemes, many schemes. So one is, and in fact, Sri Raman, who is the chairman of SIDBI, just talked about it at the previous session. One is, how do we make sure that MSMEs are aware of all of these different schemes and how they can take the benefit of these schemes, right? Another aspect of this is also actually helping them improve their sales. So from a marketing and sales perspective, today 40% of India's GDP is contributed by MSMEs, right? So are we, educating them and saying, look, here are business opportunities for you that they can also take advantage of. At C2FO, this is something that we do a lot of, creating awareness that, look, there's an early pay product that you can take advantage of. That's not a loan, that's pure cash in your hand. And that's something that we've had to develop capabilities to reach out to these suppliers in, different regional vernaculars. English and Hindi are not going to do it if you want to have pan-India coverage. So one is just around awareness. I think Mahalakshmi talked about sustainability, ESG. Again, we find that MSMEs are perhaps not aware of what are the different things they need to do or the steps they need to be taking today to ensure that they can remain relevant in local and global supply chains, right? So again, that's where the awareness bit is really important. The second aspect that we talk about, and no surprises here, is really access to credit, right? And again here, I want to break it up into 2 parts because there is the delayed payments and we talked about what C2FO is doing or what banks are doing, and there's again many different players who are attacking that problem. TREDS is another really important piece there. In fact, we have recently been approved to also operate a TREDS license by the Reserve Bank. So that's a really important step that the government is taking. But also, beyond that, how are we thinking about improving access to credit using true cash flow based lending tools, right? Before this conversation, Arun and I were chatting about credit ratings, right? And can we create credit ratings that are based on different transactions that are going through the books of the MSMEs and not looking at just balance sheets and P&L statements and so on and so forth, right? So, with that, let me hand it over to the other panelists. But that's what we're trying to do at C2FO.
Sure. Quickly, a couple of questions, Basant. One is, you said that in a market, you have a marketplace model, and the fact that you emphasize the pricing part, that we are also able to do it at a good price. And how do you really do that? And I'm asking this question because in India, if you see, even the bond market has, after all this effort by everybody, the RBI and the government is still very, very not at a state that we can boast of a good and vibrant bond market. The issue here, and I think the trade market is even more difficult because you don't know it's a good trade or a bad trade. What is there in the contract? How do you evaluate the collateral? All of this is a blank. So how does that problem really get solved? Because delayed payment to a large extent is also all this. One is the willingness to pay and exercising the fact, exploiting the fact that you are large. But the other problem is also that there are so many rejections and which makes the trade go bad. How do you solve that through a digital setup?
Sure. So I think we're able to do that through a few ways, right? And that's where technology really plays a critical role. When we create this marketplace, what we're effectively saying is that, I'll take an example, and I think that'll clarify it for everybody. So if you have a large corporate, and let's say if I'm a supplier to that large corporate, once the goods have been received and the invoice has been booked in the system of the large corporate, that's a acknowledged accounts payable that's sitting in the books of that large corporate. What we at C2FO do is we create a system where that approved invoice is actually getting pulled into C2FO, and then reaching out to a supplier like Basant to say, look, if you have 100 rupees that's coming due in 30 days, would you be interested in giving a discount to get paid earlier on that invoice, right? So one, there's no credit risk because this is now an approved invoice, and that's what I meant by saying we've eliminated credit risk in this process. And the second thing is that we're actually putting power in the hands of the supplier to say, okay, what is the discount that you would be willing to give for the 30, let's assume there's a 30-day period, right? And what the system then does is that, let's say Basant gives a, X% of a discount, and, what the system will do at the back end is say, run an algorithm and say, yes, that sounds like a fair price, because Basant's propensity to give a discount, or the amount of discount that she's willing to give, also keeps changing, right? And that's where technology becomes really important. And today, in fact, in India, we are in a place where we are very data rich, right? So we're actually, if I look at 5 years ago, the visibility we had into how many of these suppliers on my platform are MSME. Well, it was very difficult to know that. But today, because of Udyam and a lot of work that the government has done, that's become much easier, right? Similarly, through GST, we're being able to see, well, where are these suppliers located? Which clusters are they located in, right? So are these new to credit? Are these well-established players located in large tier 1 cities? So, you're able to leverage a lot of that data to say this is the fair price for supplier X versus Y. And again, we're putting the power in the hands of the supplier. So, what you think is the fair price should be that. And of course, it meets the criteria set by the buyer as well.
Sure. I'm going to come back with a related question to Mr. Mishra, because the traditional banking system has known this. Uday Kotak started with bill discounting. So, but I'll come to that later. But Varad, from Omidyar Network, how do you see this problem getting resolved?
Thank you. Firstly, thank you to to GAME and to Nudge. I think you put together a great panel on a very important topic. So I represent Omidyar Network India. We are an investment firm focused on impact. We work with bold and purpose-driven entrepreneurs who are trying to serve what we call the next 500 million Indians. It essentially is the Indians who are coming online for the first time using the mobile phone over the last few years. Demographically, it's the bottom 60% of India's income distribution, typically small shopkeepers, gig economy workers, and the profile. And so as you can imagine, supporting MSMEs is really at the core of our work. Over the last 10 years, we have invested in a range of organizations, from lending platforms to facilitators, incubators, etc., to really make the space more vibrant for MSMEs. And when the pandemic hit and the whole problem of MSMEs again, probably for the 100th time, came to the fore, because that was something we could all visibly see, one of the things we did was launched a special initiative called Resolve to really focus on the systemic and structural issues around MSMEs. And that's how this idea of trying to identify what are the biggest pain points and is there something we can do about it came in conversation with GAME and with Dun & Bradstreet. We felt that the delayed payment issue is almost like one of the biggest elephants in the room. And while everybody talks about the problems of the MSMEs, talks about a range of solutions, this is one of those things that has almost become so ingrained as part and parcel of the life of MSMEs. And we saw some examples in that video that it is almost something which is taken for granted. And I think really in many ways that is at the root of this problem, that it is something which emanates from a power asymmetry between the big guys and the small guys. It is something that paradoxically the small guy is paying for the working capital of the large guy situation. And unfortunately, because it has become so part and parcel of our existence, that it has almost become a cultural norm, and which leads to this vicious cycle. And I don't know whether you shared this data today, but you have some global data as well, and it appears that in the global context in India, this is perhaps even more ingrained than in other countries. And therefore, I think trying to address this really hairy, wicked problem is so important if we are to really make a dent in solving for India's MSMEs. I think you talked about some of the ideas around it, and I'm sure the other panelists who come from very interesting vantage points will talk about it. I think the 3 or 4 categories of things, this is not something which has a single silver bullet solution. That is, I think, very, very clear when we speak to partners, when we speak to stakeholders, when we speak to customers. There has to be a range of things which need to be done. And I would put them in 3 or 4 buckets. The first is, of course, in the policy and regulatory bucket. I think already mentioned that the government is seized of the problem, trying to do a number of things, but perhaps more is needed. Could the government drive this as an important policy priority? We heard the finance minister during COVID speaking about the fact that public sector undertakings must immediately pay the dues. And you saw the numbers of public sector undertakings on one of the slides from Arun there. So that kind of stuff which has to be done. We need to include data on this on a regular basis in things like the government's economic survey, etc., and the government push us. So that's one type of solutions. The second is, market innovations, and your organization is leading the charge, I think, in some sense. I think TREADS has been a big hope for the country. Unfortunately, it hasn't taken off in the way it should have. There are issues around adoption of TREADS, which again need to be taken care of. The Ministry of MSME has something called the Samadhan portal, which is to help overcome disputes between MSMEs and buyers on payment-related issues. Unfortunately, the take-up of that has not been much. So we need to think of other online dispute resolution mechanisms. I think there are some partners in this conference who are trying to take online dispute resolution as a way of low-cost, less friction resolution of issues which leads to the late payment problem. Pre-solve is one example which I think is also here. So there's a whole bunch of things we need to do on market innovation. And then lastly, I think, moral suasion is very important, and I'd love to hear your views on the matter. Can we create a movement around this problem? Can we celebrate the guys who actually do a good job? Can we find a creative way of maybe naming and shaming the ones who are not doing a good job? And can we create almost, the idea that GAME had around a prompt payment pledge, which is championed by industry, by our leaders and so on, so that this really becomes, and we have a great track record of taking on things, in the earlier session, the talk of a mission mode. Can we take this on as a topic, which in the same footing and try to create a massive dent in this problem over the next 3 to 5 years. I think that's the only way the status quo will change. So we need to think about the regulatory and policy set of solutions. We need to think about the market innovation solutions. And lastly, we have to think about how can we really make this movement at the country level. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Thanks, Varad. Sounds great, creating a movement. I'm just reminded of this thing, but I'm sorry to be slightly skeptical about it, because, I remember this thing from Walmart. It used to be said that if you are a supplier to Walmart, you are dead. And if you don't get to supply to Walmart, you're dead anyway. So either ways, it's like that. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there has to be a collective movement to ensure that people truly feel. But how do we fix the reward system? Because the people only listen to market rewards. But more on that later. Ram, over to you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ram. I work with Hero MotoCorp. We make two-wheelers. We're the largest two-wheeler manufacturer in the world. It's lovely to be here. By the way, it sounds like I'll be speaking on behalf of all the big bad corporates who got spoken about earlier. But I'm a buyer. I've done procurement and supply chain work for the most part of my life, and that's what I do at Hero as well. I do want to talk about the philosophy at Hero for a little bit. I'll take a couple of minutes to talk about that, and then I'll hopefully also talk about some of the challenges and opportunities that I heard from the discussion earlier today. So, firstly, at Hero, we came from being an MSME ourselves. Is the DNA in the company. We were founded in a small workshop in Ludhiana. The ancillaries that we work with, who are all very large companies today, they themselves were MSMEs not too long ago. So there is a lot of, the first thing I want to talk about, by the way, which is empathy for our MSMEs that we work with within Hero. We have about 800 of them that we work with directly. I would say there's about 500-600 crores a year that we spend with them. But the ones that we work with indirectly are far more. I would say 10 to 20 times as much is the number of probably MSMEs that we work with indirectly, who work with our partners. And these smaller companies who work with our partners, of course, are hidden to us from being able to work with them directly. But one thing we're very proud of is the fact that we are 100% compliant with our payment process. Right? I'll talk about how in the next important keyword for us, but it starts with, again, the first word, which is empathy. Because if you don't empathize with your partners and you don't understand the problems that they have, you're not going to be able to creatively solve for the problems that they come to you with. And these problems change on a daily basis, but it's really important to be able to put yourself in their shoes. And me and my team, that's what we do on a daily basis. Our job is to make sure that we are in their shoes and we figure out how to solve problems creatively for them. And I think Varad spoke a little bit about, what's the incentive. The incentive is very simple, by the way, coming from a procurement background. Our reputation, Hero's reputation, our team's reputation is at risk every single time we go into a transaction and we shortchange the supplier. We say we'll pay in 30 days or 45 days and we don't pay. That's Hero's credibility, Hero's reputation that's at risk. And that, once lost, is very difficult to regain. And the best partners, the most creative partners, I think we heard some folks say it on the video as well, you're not going to work with us. They're not going to come work with us. They're not going to want to work with us. Despite the fact that we're the largest, I can tell you right now that there are enough partners who would probably walk away from us if we weren't as clear about how we pay our partners. There's an axiom we live by. I don't know if many of you might have heard this, which is revenue is vanity, profitability is sanity, cash is reality, right? So we live by that on a daily basis, I can tell you, and we're proud of the fact that we pay our partners in time. Now, there are opportunities still for us to get better. I just mentioned our tier 2, tier 3 partners. Do they pay their MSMEs on time? Is that something that we're tracking systematically? Unfortunately, no. There are partners who come to us with requests that we're unfortunately not able to honor today because of the lack of a process or the lack of a system or the lack of a capability. We're trying to build those, but there is room for us to do better. The second part of it is technology. Now, I think Basant spoke about it. You heard it from a couple other panelists as well. Technology plays a critical part in our ability to do this. Now, I'll give you one quick example. invoices that come into our portal. Till recently, or I would say a few years ago, if a supplier brings an invoice to our portal, if the invoice details don't match what's in my system, unfortunately, that invoice is going to get stuck. It gets stuck, then there is a period of resolution which is manual and requires people to get in and resolve it, and it takes time. And all of a sudden, payments are delayed. Now, the intent, if you notice in this entire process, is not wrong. Everybody's doing their job, and we're all trying to sort of sort the problem, but it might just take a lot longer. And in the meantime, the partner is suffering, and that's not okay. So now there is a system that we've devised wherein, and even before a delivery is made, the partner comes and puts the invoice in the system. And if the invoice is approved, and there are, we've done some robotic process automation to sort of, autofill a bunch of things, but if the invoice is approved, then the supplier sends his goods in. And that way, he knows that there is an approved invoice that he's going to be able to send, which takes care of 95% of the usual problems that exist with just data not matching. So technology, I think, has a large role to play. Again, Basant spoke about how technology can be used to figure out what the right credit rating for a supplier is so that you're able to give him the right kind of financing. So I believe there's a lot more potential to be able to use technology and then enable our partners to get access to financing, get access to different tools, and also resolve disputes a lot faster. Right? There's got to be automated ways in which we're able to do that. I'll end by saying at Hero, we firmly believe, and most other corporates, by the way, I saw the manufacturing sector, we were at about 82%, if I remember right. So we're slightly better off than the others, but a long way to go still, right? But I was saying that I think the intent from a buyer, as a buyer, I can tell you, is to pay my partners absolutely on time. And the reason is my reputation, my brand's reputation. I want the most innovative, the best partners to come work with us. And that's the job that we do on a daily basis. So the intent's there. The issue usually is process, capability, maturity. That's usually what gets in the way. As much as I would love to say we're using this as a working capital, it's not.
Sure, just one quick question. How much of this, the fact that you are in Hero Motors and in the auto sector has to do with this? Because my understanding is autos have to work very closely with ancillary companies because the lead time to work with the vendors is very large. You have to work with each one for 1 to 1.5 years to develop a product, and they have a huge impact on your supply chain. And now you compare this against some FMCG players dealing with some packaging where they might have 35 approved vendors. It's so easy to dump one and move on to the other. Next day you can get the next vendor. So there is also a business imperative, not to undermine what you're doing. I'm sorry, it might sound like that, but that's not the meaning. But I think this is to do with the sector dynamics also, isn't it?
See, yes and no. And the reason I say no is even within our portfolio today, there's plenty of categories in which I have choices and partners, right? I have screws and nuts and bolts and that are made by 10, 20 people in the country. If I include sources from abroad, it'll probably quadruple. But the question is, what's your DNA? All of them the same. See, the question is, what's your DNA, right? It starts from there, in my view. As much as it's an imperative, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I don't think that's really the starting point for how we treat our partners and when we pay them. I used to work for Airtel before this. And I can tell you at Airtel, the philosophy was very similar. Payments are not a place for you to go, use as leverage or negotiate. That's a discipline. It's about, you do all the negotiation beforehand or after.
Sure, fair enough.
Good afternoon, and thank you, GAME, for this opportunity. I have been listening to my fellow panelists with intent. And while I'm speaking today, I have mixed feelings. I am happy that, ultimately even GAME has recognized that it is an important issue. It is the elephant that is in the room that need to be addressed. And they have come out with a fantastic study that has shown some interesting insights. But I'm sad also that instead of discussing issues like how the global value chains are being transformed, how when the manufacturing itself is being changed completely with IoT and 3D printing, we are still discussing an issue which is at least 40 years old. After decades of lobbying, the Parliament passed Delayed Payments to Small Scale and Ancillary Industrial Undertaking Act holder bill in 1993. So since 1993, we have been discussing this issue through different acts. Ultimately, it was subsumed in 2006 Act of MSMED Act. And then later on, several other initiatives have been taken by the government. Of course, with each initiative, acts like facilitation councils were set up, and that provided some tools to the people who have been adversely affected through delayed payment to seek justice. TREADS has been really a fantastic market-based solution, and MSMEs, as you know, that every invoice that MSMEs raises, if unpaid theoretically, get converted into a negotiable instrument and could be financed. But we would not be able to take this elephant out of the room unless we understand that what are the framework conditions within which MSMEs operate in the country. If you look at the raw material market, iron, steel, copper, aluminium, plastic raw material, that is polymers or glass, all of them are manufactured by 2 or 3 manufacturers, that's all. And it is almost impossible to import these items because they are not subjected to the discipline of imports. Either they are anti-dumping duties, they are safeguard duties, there are non-tariff barriers, standards, and so on and so forth. So that makes it almost impossible to import it, to create a pressure on the manufacturers so that they can serve the buyers. And the buyers are whom? Micro, small, and medium enterprises. So if you're an MSME and if you want to buy a raw material, you have to give in cash. First, give the bank draft and then wait for the supplies. This is the factor markets in India. And so is, as a matter of fact, when it comes to the finished products. Pardon, Ram, if I may mention automobile. Look at the automobile sector. Now, automobile majority of the parts and components are being supplied micro, small, and medium enterprises, if you leave engine and some other key components. But automobile as such is again not subjected to the discipline of imports. I don't know whether you'd be aware that typically in India, the import duties are in the range of 5 to 10%. But when it comes to automobiles, it ranges anywhere between 50% to 100%. It is impossible to import a foreign car. That's why you don't see foreign cars, because it is impossible to really import it economically. So the point I'm trying to make is that neither on the raw material side nor on the finished market side, the markets are functioning efficiently. There is disjointed, we can say, market economy is in the play. And so on one hand, if I am an MSME, I am giving cash the raw material, but when it comes to supplying, I am supplying to the person who is paying me as per his or her whims and fancies. They can do so because they are not again subjected to the discipline of imports. There is another set of market for MSMEs, and that is government. Government also is not subjected to the discipline of imports. So neither the large corporates buyers nor the government buyers, which at least in the central government provide us 25% set aside, and it is a huge market for us in India, particularly so. I don't know how many of us are aware that almost 1/3 of India's GDP is constituted by public procurement. So government buying is huge, and most of the MSME, at least which are better organized, either are supplying to the large corporates or to the government in the B2B segment. So this is what the framework conditions are, and we need to see that while we are working on the solutions like through the act or through other means, as a responsible organization, I would see that we have to also realize that there is no point trying to tighten the screw too much. If we do that, we might end up losing the buyer itself, because buyers would start bypassing the MSMEs and they would start getting the supplies through the intermediaries. And that's what is happening. We have seen that if you push them too much, that okay, 100% should come on trades. I mean, my organization would say that also. Why not? But the fact is that if you do that, then they would stop directly buying from you. They would have another intermediary in between, which will not be an MSME, and they will buy from them. Ultimately, the loser will be the MSME. So there has to be a market-based solution. And I think moving forward, we have to see that effective functioning of factor markets to unleash the discipline of imports so that MSMEs have access to economically priced raw material and of better quality. This is one part. And that would require some reforms. And second is that encourage fintech to leverage transaction data to replace asset-based collaterals with information-based collaterals. That I think is the move forward. Thank you very much.
No, I'm just saying, what is the role financial institutions can really play? And now we are getting these, digital solution providers in the trade space. What is it that in the end, there is huge proliferation of banks, and where is it that they are lacking in solving this problem?
Good evening, everyone here. In fact, if you are the last panelist, you have certain advantages and certain disadvantages, and more disadvantages. But then it is a prerogative of the the moderator, and the moderator is Mahalakshmi, so you can't do anything about this. First thing is that I must appreciate the initiatives taken by the game, and these initiatives may be a game changer, in fact, in times to come, to try to develop a culture with the prompt payment culture. The other day in the Rajya Sabha, the Minister of State MSME was making a statement that during the last 2 years, out of the 10 or 11 trillion odd the delayed payments, only in the last 2 years only, hardly 1 trillion has been recovered, and that includes the PSUs also. So we need to develop this prompt payment culture. The bank comes at a time, we can at the most we can do there are two aspects to the bank getting involved in this. One is that there is a huge credit gap. We are a country where we have the banking is around 400 trillion, 175 deposit and maybe 125 plus is the credit. And as per a very conservative estimate also at this moment, we have a credit gap only for MSME, which is more than 20 trillion. So you can see and MSME, the name itself, it is not the micro small by any standard when you talk about their contribution towards GDP and more importantly the employment part. But what I'm going slightly out of box is the fact that the banks have a limited role. If I have a buyer and the buyer comes to me, one, I am doing the credit meeting, trying to meet their credit requirement, and two, when there is a delayed payment, I have a bills which is accepted by the buyer, then I will do a bill discounting. But my role as a socially responsible organization doesn't end there. I need to educate the MSMEs also. There I have an issue. All that we are talking here is basically about the MSME. Most of them are registered in the Udyami portal. We have a huge number of units. As per the NSSO's estimate, we are 63 million plus units all over the country. And I am sure there is a huge number of units which are located in the rural areas. We have 6,38,000 villages in this country, and 65% of our people live in the villages. Even after 75 years of independence, the urbanization rate has not been commensurate. It has taken 100 years for a shifting of nearly 25% people. 90% people we were there when we got independence. Now we are 65% people still in rural areas. So maybe it will take another 50 years for the remaining, say, 15% people to come to the urban areas. So people are bound to stay in rural areas, and it is good also because you simply don't have the infrastructure in cities to cater to their requirements. So what I'm trying to say is that we have we have so many diversities in the country, and one diversity is that we have very good entrepreneurs, but they are not technical, they are not digitally literate, they are not educated, and we have some entrepreneurs who are educated, they are engineers, they are diploma holders, they are good mechanics. Our friend Kuppuswamy, he was in Ludhiana, I was also in Ludhiana. So you have a lot of diversities, different kinds of people. So those people who are not in the formal sector, out of the 63 million odd units, I think hardly, as per the Udemy portal, it is hardly a few lakhs are registered in the Udemy, and the rest all are in the unorganized sector. So I think we need to be more careful about those people who are not in the formal system, because they need our help more. So we need to have more innovation, this kind of innovation that will suit to them. What Basant Kaur was telling, that I mean this has to be specific, suiting to their requirement, because those who are in a better place and educated, they can easily try to find out what are the facilities available in the system. And for the banker, the guarantee scheme also envisages that it is available up to 2 crores. Having the definition of MSME has been changed 2 years ago. I think 2 crores is peanuts now. The guarantee amount should increase. This is what has happened in ECLGS also. Although we have a 4.5 crores kitty, the disbursement has not been to the extent it was expected. It is because many of them are informal sector. So my priority, what I will try to focus is that those who are not in the formal system, I think the game can again play a very big role to bring them to the formal system first. So some kind of movement is required for that. Once they come to the formal system, then you go for the what you call the prompt payment movement. And as Mahalakshmi ji was telling very rightly, it is if you make supply to Walmart, you are finished. If you don't make supply also, you are finished. So badi machli and choti machli, this issue will always remain. So we should be more careful about the chote machli, the small one, who is a really small one. Although they all put together, they are very big. There is hardly any micro or small. But there are, individually they are very small, they are little neglected, and they need our help more than the bigger ones. Thank you.
Thank you so much, audience and all the panelists. I'm sorry, I would have loved to take some questions, but we've already overshot time. Let's just hope that all the solutions that have been already listed in the report sees the light of the day, and by this time next year we have something good to report. Thank you so much.
The critical importance of SMEs to the economy,
as they create millions of jobs
and lead to the economic development of the nation.
I understand that SMEs suffer when they do not receive due payments from buyers on time.
Delayed payments affect SME earnings,
lead to an increase in their borrowing costs,
and eventually make their products and services costly for everybody.
The overall impact is even more adverse since it lowers tax revenue,
disrupts the supply chain, as well as the overall economic health of the country.
As a responsible buyer,
I promise to ensure that EY,
that Persistent Systems,
Tata Play,
Maruti Suzuki,
that Nestle India,
Home Lane,
Lightstrong,
HDFC Bank,
Bangalore International Airport India,
plus CJ,
LG Equipments,
that RPG Group,
MTR Foods Private Limited will pay SMEs promptly
and definitely
within 45 days
of a valid invoice submission.